I'll request him to join on stage with Mr. Satish Padmanabhan. A very warm welcome to both of them. Satish ji and Shashi ji, dono ko request. So as you know, this session is on literature, diplomacy, and art of global thinking. Dr. Shashi Tharoor in conversation with Mr. Satish Padmanabhan. So we'll request both the gentlemen to join us on stage. And of course, we do understand the excitement and frenzy here. I understand everybody has to take an autograph or a picture, but we would like to start with the session, after which we could do them. So I'll request everybody to control the excitement and settle down so that we can start with our session. You want a clock? No. We'll give a chip. Yes, we'll give a chip.
10 minutes for Q&A.
Yes.
So at 11:40, can you indicate?
Yes, I will do that. Can we can we have Dr. Shashi ji now on stage? I request everybody to please settle down. I was already anticipating this, but not to this extent. So I request our young crowd, if you can please settle down. I know everybody wants to take a picture. I'll be a liar if I say even I don't want it, but we need to start the session. I'll request, please, आप लोग बैठ जाएं, हम लोग सेशन स्टार्ट करना चाहेंगे, प्लीज. Yeah, it's. I request everyone to now, please. We need to also maintain the decorum of the festival. Start with the sessions. We have a limited time, and we would like to make use of the session. This should be the last one. We request everybody to please take seats. Volunteers, please help. Volunteers, खुद ही परेशान हैं. Yes, I'll do that. All right, but you know, before we start the session, मैं request करूंगी KLF patron Mr. Ashok Boyo to please come on stage and formally welcome our guests on dais, Shashi ji as well as Satish ji. So can we have the bouquets, please? And he would be also presenting his book of various world to Dr. Shashi Tharoor ji. हम शशि जी को बताना चाहेंगे कि रॉक कंसर्ट में भी इतनी आवाजें नहीं आती हैं जितनी अभी आ रही हैं. We are truly privileged to have him here with us today. And the books. All right, thank you. Thank you, Ashokji. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please settle down and can we get the door closed, volunteers, so that there's not too much of disturbance when the session is on. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we have with us a man of incredible eminence who taught us a 36-letter word for the fear of long words. Hippopotomonstrosesquipedaliophobia. Well, I leave it there. But, ladies and gentlemen, it can be an exercise in extreme futility to find glowing words for a person whose wordplay has left the world awestruck, as has his scholarly genius. We are extremely privileged to have with us Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, former Union Minister, former diplomat, and the erudite writer of eminence, Shri Shashi Tharoor ji. A big round of applause. Who would get in conversation with Mr. Satish Padmanabhan, accomplished journalist with over 30 years of experience across print, digital media, and television, and currently serving as a managing editor, Outlook magazine, for a discussion on literature, diplomacy, and the art of global thinking. So I let Satish ji take this session forward from here. Thank you.
Thank you all, but I think Satish's mic needs to be switched on.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And it's great to be here at the Kalinga Lit Fest. It's such a pleasure always to come back to Bhubaneswar. Thank you very much, Shashi, for this session.
Great to be here. I'm sorry it's such a brief visit, but lovely to see all of you here this morning.
He just come actually after midnight and he's just rushing to the airport. So he's not going to see too much of your city, but yeah, it's there.
Yeah, I landed after midnight and I'm leaving straight after this. So I'll have to make a future visit. It's an IOU.
Yeah. I want to read out a few recent statements. February 15th. To hear a man like Donald Trump announcing that the Indian Prime Minister was a better negotiator than he was, that sounds like something Mr. Modi can put in the bank. That sounds very good. This he said on February 15th.
Yep.
February 20th. Kerala is beginning to stand out as a model of economic innovation and sustainable growth. This is on the startup thing in Kerala, which is ruled by the opposition left. Then just 3 days ago, on March 19th, I'm still wiping the egg off my face because I'm one person in the parliamentary debate who actually criticized the Indian position on February 2022. The policy has meant that India has actually a prime minister who can hug both the president of Ukraine and the president in Moscow 2 weeks apart and be accepted in both places. So of late, Shashi Tharoor has not been so at his diplomatic best with his own party, it seems. And these are all, as you know, these have all been trending on social media, and there has been a lot of controversy regarding these. So this is not at your diplomatic
I honestly thought these were merely factual observations. They were not meant to be the object of great controversy. That they have become controversial is actually, in some ways, a sad reflection of the state of our politics. We have reached now a level of polarization in our politics where I honestly think that the acrimony is not good for our country. We can agree to disagree, but what is politics? Politics should be about trying to create a better India. Now,
absolutely,
you can have different views on how to do it. So obviously, I'm not a communist and I'm not a communalist, and those are both different approaches. But even within our political space, we should be able to see good things that we do, and we should be able to see shall we say, merit in what the other side is doing when it does anything right. In fact, with the example you took of the Kerala startups, and I actually pointed out that this was a welcome change from the Communist Party, which had been historically quite unfriendly to business. And I said, I hope that when they're in opposition, they will continue this policy that they now want credit for. Yeah. So in other words, I was exhorting them to join a kind of consensus and to stay there. Not only when they're in government. You can't be pro-business when you're in government and anti-business when you're in opposition.
Yeah.
That's my point, that growth applies.
No, I completely agree. It only becomes, in fact, the parliamentary debates, the relationship between the opposition and the ruling, it only gets richer, I suppose, if there is this kind of understanding. And I mean, why be so rigid? I mean, it can't be that if you're in the opposition, anything that the ruling party does all of it can be only negated, right? I mean, on the other hand, the ruling party also, I mean, should acknowledge, some of the successes that the opposition has gained in their state. So it can only sort of enrich the debates in parliament and the relationship between politicians, I guess.
Look, I mean, my own view is very simple, that these people are my adversaries, but they're not my enemies.
Yeah.
And I would say to the government as well, I mean, the opposition is not anti-national. They may be anti your party. That doesn't make them anti-national. We all have a different vision of what the nation should be and how we should get there. All of us want to see Indians prospering and successful. We just disagree about the way we're getting there. Let's do so with respect.
Absolutely.
As the old line goes, let's disagree without being disagreeable.
Yeah. That's good. On the question of, what you talked about, Prime Minister Modi's, relationship and his meetings with Ukraine and Ukrainian president, as well as the Russians. But Mr. Tharoor, this is, it seems that the whole world is at some kind of a reset, in a reset mode. What we knew in the Cold World War, the arch enemies like the US and the USSR are now in some bromance. NATO, which was
well, not the USSR, they don't exist anymore.
Russia
and America.
Russia. Then USA, which was this great ally and supporter of NATO, President Trump seems to think that it's leeching off America now. Within the European Union, it's very fraught. Germany wants something, France is something else. China is saying that it's prepared for any war. So do you think, there is some kind of a reset in the world order all around, and the recent past?
Definitely. Well, not just the recent past, I think since the election of Mr. Trump. Because, for 70 odd years, since the end of the Second World War, there was a broad consensus on the principles of how the world should be run. And even the first Trump administration did not depart extensively from that consensus.
Right.
It's called the liberal international world order, for what it's worth. Liberal in the sense that it rests on certain agreed assumptions of state sovereignty, inviolability of borders, respect for each country's rights, and at the same time, a shared system of coexistence where you function within agreed rules that everybody accepts. But suddenly in sort of Trump 2.0, these agreed rules have been thrown to the window.
Right.
He has been describing his neighboring state as the 51st state of his country.
Yeah.
He has been declaring about a treaty ally. Denmark is an ally within NATO, that he wants to take over Greenland, which is a sovereign territory of Denmark. He has essentially been discussing peace in Ukraine with Russia, but without involving Ukraine. He has been talking about taking over the Panama Canal. He has said that he should convert Gaza into a kind of Middle Eastern Riviera. There is an astonishing sense of none of the rules apply.
Yeah.
None of the ways in which the world was assumed to function can be assumed anymore. That is what is truly astonishing and remarkable about this.
And this disruption, what might it lead to? What do you envisage?
Does anyone know? Does even Mr. Trump know? I don't know. The gentleman is very unpredictable. And I think as long as that unpredictability remains, it will be a very rash person who would make a prediction about the future. My gut feeling is that there are some things that cannot easily be changed. There are some things which can involve thinking the unthinkable, but not necessarily doing it. And there are some things which might actually become possible. Now, the Panama Canal is an interesting example. Mr. Trump did not cancel the treaty under which the canal was surrendered to the Panamanians. But he got an American company to buy out the majority of the shares in the Chinese company, Hutchinson of Hong Kong, that was running the canal. So de facto, the Americans are running the canal without scrapping the old treaty. Now, that's feasible. What is feasible can be done. What is, shall we say, annexing Canada and making it a state of the US is not so feasible.
That's true. They may be in some kind of realm of fiction, actually. But Mr. Tharoor, this the famous Trump-Zelensky meeting, which was telecast live, and the whole world saw it. There has been a lot of criticism as to how the Americans come out as bullies, especially President Trump and his deputy Vance. But, do you also think that this is, in some ways, it's also an honest and a transparent, account of what happens when leaders meet, and why shouldn't the world kind of see it and as it happens. And it does seem to be a sort of a slightly refreshing look at, president's meeting, isn't it? I've never seen, I remember, for instance, seeing these AICC meetings in my growing up days, where the Doordarshan camera would pan on these all white starched kurtas and saris, and nobody's saying anything. And, and the meeting is convened because everybody's backstabbing the other. But so here is it also a kind of an honesty that,
No, look, it's relatively rare for there to be this much of unpleasantness in a meeting, and it's literally unprecedented to do it in front of television cameras. In some ways, this represents a departure not only from past precedent, but also from the manner in which diplomacy is conducted. Normally what happens is that in the old days, you send a very civilized ambassador to the other country to talk to civilized officials from that country, and the message comes back in that spirit. You don't actually have a direct confrontation taking place in front of the cameras, televised around the world, discussed on social media in real time. It is kind of a 21st century development, which arguably no one could have expected, predicted, and which we may not see again, because honestly, everyone was shaken up by it. However, in the case of Mr. Trump, it worked. Mr. Zelensky was unceremoniously thrown out of the White House. He was denied the lunch to which he had been invited. He went back quietly to his hotel, but then he essentially agreed to give Mr. Trump what Mr. Trump wanted.
Yeah.
So in some ways, you could argue that what Mr. Trump is doing is fulfilling what President Nixon used to call the madman theory of diplomacy. The madman theory of diplomacy is if you behave in a genuinely mad way, everyone is so afraid of how you will react that they will actually do what you want because they have no idea what you're going to do tomorrow. And that kind of thing is perhaps what is happening, because obviously very many world leaders in dealing with Mr. Trump will be extra careful to be on their guard because they cannot be sure how he might react, how he might behave in public, whether they might be humiliated before the world's television cameras. They're going to have to be very careful and conscious of all this. Now, I don't know how long this can carry on. We're looking at a tumultuous month and a half, 2 months since President Trump became president again.
Yeah, in fact, what's about to come now from April, I mean, the tariffs, if they really kick in, which are the countries that may be affected, how strict are the tariffs going to be? So it's all going to be quite a lot of fun and games, I think, in the next few weeks too.
No, well, India, of course, has a 9-month negotiating window for a trade deal. The agreement when Mr. Modi went to Washington was that we would have till the fall. Meanwhile, these tariffs will kick in on the 2nd of April, but which tariffs will apply to India when and effective from when and for how long, etc., may also be subject to the overall negotiation. The fact that we have this overall negotiation is important. That's why I welcome that aspect of it, because frankly, when Mr. Modi went, we didn't have this window to negotiate a deal. And we need these deals. I mean, frankly, America is one of the very few countries with which we have a trade surplus. See, unlike China, which has a massive surplus against us, China is selling us $100 billion more of goods than we are selling them, whereas we are selling the Americans $45 billion more than they're selling us. So this relationship is of some value to us, and we have to therefore try and protect as much as possible. I am not overwhelmingly convinced that we need to be having high tariffs on some American products that are consumed by a small elite in this country. How many people are buying these things? What is the amount going to make a difference? I mean, I think somebody said Harley Davidson motorcycles was a prestige issue for Mr. Trump, and we were charging 150% tariff or something. But the whole country only bought 87 Harley Davidson models. How does it matter if you get that duty or you don't get that duty?
That's true. If it helps in some optics, it's great.
Bourbon, whiskey, same story. I think we should now be very sort of open to looking realistically at whether we want tariffs as a revenue enhancer for our country, in which case, where are we getting significant revenue from tariffs? Whether we want it as a trade deterrent, whether we want to discourage the consumption of certain products. We have to understand what is the logic of our tariff and why have we applied certain tariffs. That discussion has to happen.
Just a little bit more on the diplomacy part and geopolitics, and then we'll come to the literary side of the discussion. I, as a corollary to what you were just saying about this world being, in some kind of a reset form, do you think there is also been of late this rightward lurch all over the, throughout the world, from Latin America, from Brazil, US, of course, In Europe, France, Germany, Italy is anyway run by a very right-wing government. Even this side, Japan and Egypt, Turkey. Do you think there is this, as you said, from since World War II, that there was this sort of an order coming into place? Is it some kind of going back, getting less inclusive, little bit more rigid, walls being erected, fences being put up? Is it some kind of a regressive
Yeah, you had a
trend?
lot of thoughts there. I wouldn't say it's rigid because actually many things are in flux. But I would agree with you, the walls are going up. And I would say if you ask the Europeans, they are very, very confused as to whether they are truly allies anymore or whether it's worth it being an ally when you're being attacked by your principal ally. So some of these are questions that you have to ask other countries how they feel. But certainly the world order is very uncertain. Even some of our assumptions coming from the earlier Trump administration. Because Trump, for example, in his first term was very anti-China. He launched a trade war against China de facto. Today, with perhaps the influence of Mr. Musk, America seems much more friendly and receptive to China.
Yeah.
And they're talking about doing deals with China.
Mm.
So we cannot take anything for granted. And I think this calls for a diplomacy of keeping our eyes and ears open, being alert, being responsive, and being quick on our feet. And that's true not just of us, but of every other country that's dealing with this unpredictable world.
And so now moving to so this unpredictability and this kind of disruption, a kind of a new order, perhaps. How do you think it may result in literature, in books, in I mean, not what you might write, but generally, because they say that books and poetry actually reflect a lot more of the society at that time than even recorded evidence in historical books, in history, or in poetry or literature as evidence. How do you think this period is going to? I mean, what kind of
And literature has always had that role. The question is, I hope it'll survive into the 21st century. Are people reading any? I was delighted when all these young people came up with my books to sign. But how many are still doing that? There is an increasing concern. Both my sons, for example, are from perhaps the last generation that read constructively, consistently. They're both journalists like you.
Yes.
And they're wondering whether the next generation of readers is being born or not. That is the extraordinary worry that I see in the West. In India, we are still, I think, in reading mode, but increasingly, what are people reading? They're reading WhatsApp forwards. They're not reading books. We are worrying about the attention span of our readers. There's a lovely story about literature, which I came across not long ago when Nehruji was apparently going to some literary prize giving or something. And he had this habit of bounding up the stairs. He was not walking, he was running up. And Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, the great Hindi novelist, was just behind him. And Nehru, in his haste running, he tripped and was about to fall, and Dinkar supported him. And he stood up. And so Nehru turned to Dinkar and thanked him. And Dinkar said, but you know that whenever politics trips and falls, it is always literature that comes to the rescue. It's a great story. And your question it reminded me of that story because literature has to come to the rescue. In the days of the Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, there was this entire culture of Eastern European literature, which spoke of deeper truths than they were allowed to write about publicly, whether it is Ismail Kadare in Albania, whether Milan Kundera in the Czechoslovakia, all of those, that kind of thing. Literature, in some ways, is that famous metaphor of the parrot being sent down to the bottom of the mine shaft. When you're digging a new coal mine or whatever, you apparently, to be sure that the miners, that it's safe for them to work down below, you send a bird, often a parrot or a canary, down in a cage to the bottom of the thing.
Okay.
If the canary or the parrot chokes to death or comes back gasping for air when you pull the cage up, then you know there isn't enough oxygen down below for the miners to go down. Then you've got to equip them with whatever. That is the metaphor, that if the writers, the producers of literature, they are suffocating for air, they're unable to breathe, then you know your society and your polity is in trouble.
It's such a good, it's absolutely fun. So you think that, so that's the thing, like, I don't know, with literature, it may not be, I mean, as you said, with this kind of attention span, maybe books might change. I mean, the way stories are told might change. Authors have to perhaps think of ways to engage with the younger generation. I mean, not to say that write everything in in tweets or WhatsApp messages, but in some ways, and of course there is. I mean, I'm an optimist, and there's always this hope that after a period of this passing, people will come back to
Who knows? I mean, one thing you were talking about, that Trump-Zelensky confrontation on camera. And I think in my book, my last book is a book about words, Wonderland of Words.
Yes, yes.
And I had a chapter there about diplomatic language, how no one actually says what they mean. And how, when people have had a disagreement, the official press release will say they had a frank and candid discussion, which actually meant they disagreed like hell. And they were, but the point is that used to be diplomatic language. Now, after what Trump and Zelensky went through on public camera, how can you talk about, they had a candid discussion?
These niceties and nuances are, I think we are losing in everything from from books to diplomacy to, in fact, Mr. Tharoor, as everybody knows, is a prolific writer, and he's a prolific writer, and he's written on such a wide ranging subjects. His recent books being the one he mentioned about words, which is it's one of the most addictive books that I have read. While you're reading it, you don't want to, because you can't take too much of it also, so you want to put it away, but then when the minute you put it away, you want to go back to it because you want to see what's in the next chapter. It's one of the most addictive books I have read. But of course, the more serious work, like on Ambedkar, on being a Hindu. He was just telling me that his next book is going to be on the Constitution. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. By the way, I hope that this doesn't mean that the previous mic I was completely inaudible. Could you hear me, all of you? I was audible. Okay. Anyway, they gave me a new mic, so I hope I'm still audible. But what I wanted to say was that, yes, he's quite right, Satish, because I did, in fact, write on quite a wide range of subjects in the last few years. There's my book on British colonialism. There's my book on Hinduism. There's my book on Dr. Ambedkar, a short biography. In fact, books are getting shorter because in some ways I have to take into account the attention span of readers.
Wonderland
but
of Words.
Wonderland of Words is not a short book, but the chapters are all short.
That's true.
So you can read them in doses. Keep the book in your bathroom and dip into it.
Yes, that's true. You can just read it.
But the Constitution book is really short. It is actually a deliberate attempt to introduce the Constitution to non-lawyers, to regular readers, and at the same time to have my comments on it. So,
and they couldn't be a better,
literally 101 pages. That's it.
Oh, and they couldn't, short book. Actually, they couldn't be a better time, to come out with a book like this. I think
we just had the 75th anniversary of the
and I think it is, however little the attention span of the youngsters may be, I mean, it is so important to know the Constitution. I mean, what it says, the brilliance of it,
That's right. the what your rights are under it.
Absolutely. So that would be a great. Used. So, but how would you do it in such a short, in 100 pages, 100 odd pages?
So the idea was not to write a detailed, legally scholarly tome. In fact, I think that there are enough books for scholars, for law students, and so on. What we don't have, I think, is something that people like the ones sitting in this room can read and get a sense of what it's all about. So I've written it as engagingly as I can and as informally as I can, but I've also been anchored in Constitution provisions, what important articles there are, some of the more important court judgments that affected the Constitution, and so on. And indeed, some of the debates that have been going on around it, including some that are still continuing. So I hope that people will find it. I mean, it's going to be coming out in May, so you have to wait a couple more months. But I hope that you will have it in your hands soon, and that I'll be seeing what Outlook thinks of what my attempt is to put it across to the Indian public.
And how do you are these? I mean, the subjects of the books, are they prompted by what is happening around you? I mean, do they like say the Ambedkar book, for instance?
So it varies, it does vary, and the Ambedkar book was actually requested by a British publisher. Manchester University Press was very curious, and they asked me whether I could do a book. And so in some ways, the idea didn't even come from within India. But, I had a fair amount of success with my short biography of Nehru.
Yeah.
And the feeling was, again, this whole thing of these great individuals from our contemporary history. The good books about them are all 700 pages or 10 volumes or God knows what else. And no one really reads, everyone has a very superficial understanding. So can we give people a book that they might actually read? So the Ambedkar book, again, is a couple of 100 pages. The Nehru book is about that as well. But I try and make sure that everyone has the full range of the main issues in the person's life, the main episodes and events that occurred, so no anecdote is left out. And at the same time, an appreciation of the legacy from today's perspective. When I wrote the Nehru book, it was 2003, it was the Vajpayee government in power, the first period when Nehru was seemingly being repudiated. The book was then reissued by Penguin with the Modi government in power. So clearly there was a certain value to looking at Nehru from the perspective of today. The Ambedkar book, similarly, I was not writing to stir up controversies. I was writing to make the life accessible to people. In fact, I was planning a book on a very little known figure from Kerala. I say little known. In Kerala, he's extremely well known. In fact, every street corner practically has a shrine to him. But in the rest of the country, he's unknown, and he deserves to be better known, and that's Sri Narayana Guru.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So I thought I would write a book about him, and I was beginning my research on that when suddenly my publisher said, no, the 75th anniversary of the Constitution, everyone's talking about the Constitution, we want to know your views on it. So I actually put my book aside and started this and wrote this in a bit of a breathless hurry. So we'll have to see whether it meets everyone's expectations.
In fact, another thing, even if people do know about Narayan Guru, the one aspect of it that it's even lesser known is that what a great poet he was. And how T.M. Krishna...
And in three languages.
And in 3 languages. And now the Carnatic musician T.M. Krishna...
has sung.
And it's absolutely fantastic. The concert in Delhi was mesmerizing.
Until the rain stopped.
Until the rains came. Then we all moved into the auditorium. So this is T.M. Krishna singing Narayana Guru's poetry. Which was like, I mean, it's seriously mesmerizing.
And Narayana Guru actually wrote in Sanskrit, Malayalam, and Tamil.
Yes.
So he sang all 3 languages. It's quite remarkable.
And coming back to the book, the recent book of yours, this Wonderland of Word, which I said it's one of the most addictive books that I've read. Apart from, it's not really about just words. It's about expressions, how they came about. I mean, this little anecdotes about the history of how we say things. For instance, like how many of us know here turning a blind eye? Where does that come from? So, if you want to, it's a very interesting story.
I mean, I have a lot of these anecdotes in the book, but this one is, we all know that if I try and drew Satish's attention to something, but he turned a blind eye, meaning he didn't pay any attention to me, he ignored me, whatever. What does that come from? It comes from Lord Horatio Nelson, who was this famous British admiral at the beginning of the late 18th, early 19th century. Nelson was injured in various battles. He lost one arm, one leg, one eye. So one of his eyes was completely blind. Now, in those days, remember, there are no mobile phones and WhatsApps and GPS and so on. How did ships communicate to each other? They would raise flags, and the flag was a signal. So the orders from the admiral commanding the whole fleet were conveyed by flags, which then the other ships in the fleet would have to look at and understand the orders they were given. Now, Nelson was fighting a battle which his boss, the admiral of the fleet, thought they were losing. So the admiral strung up the flags, ordering all the other ships to retreat. So what did Nelson do? He held up his telescope to look at the orders, but he held the telescope up to his blind eye. So he could not see the orders. And he went ahead, did not retreat. He fought and he won the battle. And then he said, I'm sorry, I couldn't see the orders. And that's where the expression turning a blind eye came from.
And a shot of whiskey.
Shot of whiskey is also very funny. In the Wild West, the days of the cowboys and all of that, each bullet, because you had these 6 guns, right? So each bullet had a particular price. I think it was 12 cents, if I remember correctly. And when these cowboys went into the bar and they wanted a whiskey, it so happened that one peg of whiskey was also 12 cents.
Okay.
So sometimes if they didn't have the money in their pocket, they would take a bullet out and give it to the bartender because the price was the same.
I see.
So it became a shot in exchange for a whiskey. So a shot of whiskey. Now, the bullet no longer costs 12 cents. The whiskey costs much more than 12 cents. But the expression having a shot of whiskey still endures in American English.
Where do you get all this? How do you, no, seriously, how do you do research for this? Where do you get all this?
I just love all this stuff. I mean, it just comes and stays in my head. I mean, and sometimes the stories are actually worth telling, even when they may not be true. But this is true.
No, so that's the thing about the book, So there are, of course, some chapters which are very inviting, where, like, say, bad words or irreverent expressions or jokes, etc. But it also has chapters like words that come out of aviation. One would think that let's skip this because it's going to be very technical. But something like which is one of my favorites. It's this pushing the envelope. I had no idea that it came from aviation.
From the aviation grid that a plane is supposed to fly. That's the envelope within which. So you're pushing the envelope, you're going to the outer edges.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Or another one, under the weather. That comes from sailing. You know why? Because apparently when you were not well, you were actually sent under. The bottom of the ship was where you were supposed to be least likely to be affected by the rocking of the waves and so on. So you were under the weather. If you're not well, you are sent to the bottom of the ship to rest there, because on the top of the deck, you would feel the turbulence of the waves much more. So weather is bad,
under the
you
weather.
go. So
Wow.
under the weather, he's not feeling well means he's under the weather.
Under the weather. And then, the other are these expressions and words which do not exist in English. In European languages, in other languages, there are some very, very evocative expressions there. I don't know if you recall any.
Well, one that was made famous by the Russian English novelist Vladimir Nabokov was the Russian word Toska.
Yeah.
Toska apparently represents a kind of sentimental yearning for which there is no real explanation. It cannot be nostalgia because not remembering something that happened. It cannot be desire because it's not something that can't be attained. It is an emotion for which there is no word in the English language that Nabokov, who knew both languages perfectly, could find. And so he said, there is no equivalent for the Russian word Toska. Now, the Portuguese have a similar expression called saudade. And saudade is also the same thing. And I've often said, why don't we think of words in Indian languages for which there is no, and I found one in Malayalam. There is no English for etramate.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so in Malayalam, if you want, let's say somebody tells me, Satish says, I have a friend who's sitting on the 4th row, and I'll say, which one is he? Which person is that? I would say, etramate seatlan irikkunna, etramate alan, and he will tell me, oh, it's the 8th in the line away. In other words, one word requests an answer that specifies an ordinal position in a row or a line. In English, there is no one word for that. You got which, why, when, how, but you don't have wet. So why don't we come up with something wet for etramate?
Oh, yeah, I don't know what may be in Odia language, if there is any.
There might well be, but neither of us knows Odia, so let's not go there.
So is it, I think we are running out of, are we nearing our time? Okay, we have time. Okay, the other, this one question that I had in mind, you're a writer. Writers are supposed to, shine light into darkness, reveal things to the readers, to unearth emotions and, feelings that one didn't know one had. And a diplomat, on the other hand, conceals, he covers up mostly, he's supposed to, whichever the regime that he's from, he's supposed to, it could be half truths, it could be lies even. So how, these two, the main, the two careers that you've had, of course, now the politician, which is probably a mixture of these two, but, how do you reconcile as a writer to enlighten and as a diplomat to, to cover up?
Well, even in my writing, there have been two kinds of writing. So there's been the fiction, which I have to admit I have not done for over 2 decades now, but which one day I want to go back to. And there is a non-fiction. Now, in non-fiction, I've tried to be explicit and clear. In fiction, you can be allusive, metaphorical, imaginative. In diplomacy, since you asked about it, you do leave a lot of things unsaid and unwritten. Diplomacy, as I mentioned in one of the chapters, even gave us the expression, the non-paper. What is a non-paper? It is a piece of paper. Why is it called a non-paper? Because the piece of paper, without any letterhead, lays out the negotiating position of one side with full deniability. Let's say, for example, that in the good old days of the Trump-Zelensky conversation were happening, Trump's envoy would go to the Ukrainian envoy and hand over a non-paper saying, this is what our position is.
Okay.
But if that paper leaks, the Americans can deny they ever said it because it's a non-paper.
Okay.
That shows you the extent to which in diplomacy things have to be left unsaid. in literature, in fiction, you can also go the route of the unsaid. Let the reader read between the lines.
Yeah.
Let the reader interpret silence. But in classic nonfiction, you want to lay out very clearly what you're trying to say. You have to lay out your argument. You have to reach the reader's mind. In fact, in many ways, the difference between the two is that nonfiction appeals to the reader's mind, and fiction appeals to the reader's heart or emotions. And similarly, between diplomacy and politics, diplomacy is working with the mind and often unsaid and unwritten. Whereas in politics, you are appealing to the emotions of the voters. You want them to be roused to support you.
But
so these are all very different kinds of preoccupations.
That's true. But so in your UN days, would it? I mean, for a creative mind like yours, who has written so many books. I mean, at times would it also be restrictive that things that you want to say you cannot say? What you really think you cannot air.
But that's true in every profession. Certainly, it was true. As a United Nations official, I still remember I was obliged to have a disclaimer on the copyright pages of all my books. If you find an old edition when I was still working at the UN, you will see a disclaimer saying, though the author is an official of the United Nations, none of the opinions expressed by the characters in this book should be seen as those of the author in his official capacity.
Wow.
So that was the kind of thing you had to be conscious of. And certainly, even, I used to write op-eds and articles expressing my opinions. They could easily have generated problems. There was one occasion I remember when I wrote, at the request of the New York Times, I wrote an article on the 50th anniversary of India's independence about the Indian idea and what India was all about. And the Pakistani ambassador was offended and wrote a thing to the UN Secretary General objecting to my article, saying that he has insulted the aspirations of the Muslims of the subcontinent. Why? Because I had apparently hailed the fact that in India, your religion doesn't matter, you're an Indian citizen, your rights are the same kind of thing. And the Pakistan didn't like that. So the Secretary General called me and said, you should see that I got this protest. But he said, I'm filing it vertically. And he put it in the waste paper basket. So I got away with it. But these are the kinds of things one had to be careful about. In politics, also, as you're rightly pointing out, I've discovered the hard way that sometimes there are things you can't say.
You can't say, yeah.
So sometimes it's better just to bite your tongue and not give an answer to some questions. My old boss, Kofi Annan at the United Nations, the Secretary General of the UN, once famously told me, which I've never forgotten, he said, there are no silly questions, there are only silly answers. So let anyone ask anything they like, don't answer them. Very sensible.
That's
very sensible advice.
Yeah, that's absolves me of a lot of
which I don't always remember, unfortunately.
Yeah. So in coming to this, I mean, this example that you gave in the UN, which has come back to bite you in politics the most?
I think the one that probably has hurt the longest and the worst and done the longest lasting damage was in my very first few months in politics, when Twitter was quite new. I was an early adopter of that, and a BJP leaning journalist, when the government declared an austerity drive, asked me on Twitter, so Mr. Minister, does this mean you will travel cattle class? Now, he had lived in America, I guess. I had lived in America. We all knew the expression cattle class was a very routine expression in America for the preceding 25, 30 years. And all it meant was economy class. And it was not meant to disparage the travelers as cattle. It was meant to disparage the airlines for herding us into economy like
sardines.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I replied, yes, I will travel cattle class out of solidarity with all our holy cows. Now, if at all anyone should have been offended, they should have been offended about the holy cows, but that's not what happened. Suddenly this thing hit. I went off to Africa. I was minister in those days, and I went off on an official visit to Liberia. It took about 24 hours to get there. So I was completely unaware of the huge controversy that had erupted in India and the translations into multiple languages of this expression that gave the impression, and maliciously stirred up by some, that I was disparaging ordinary people, that the Aam Aadmi was being treated by this posh minister as
I remember that bit.
And I could never live it down. I mean, in the end, Dr. Manmohan Singh himself had to diffuse it by saying to the press, for God's sake, it was only a joke. But in the meantime, A lot of people really think that I thought that economy class travelers are cattle.
Yeah.
And to this day, there are people saying, oh, he thinks we're cattle, or he thinks... This is so unfortunate, because I'm somebody who, by and large, tends to be very respectful of everybody, irrespective of their positions in life. But
Yeah.
what to do?
Yeah.
So that's one that's the
Oh,
most damaging.
Just, okay.
You have to ask the audience now, I think.
Yeah, I think we are now really only less than 10 minutes. So yeah, we can maybe throw this open to the audience now. If maybe the volunteers can pass around the mics. If anybody has any questions for...
There are hands going up, but the mic,
yeah, this is
the mic
going
is not visible.
to take a long time, I think.
While they're looking for the mic, why don't you ask the question you're about to ask?
No. So this is on the cattle class. I mean, there have been, of course, many other controversies on it. So do you think this,
thanks to your profession, you guys exist to create controversy?
No. Do you think, there has been are you like not so trigger happy with Twitter now? I mean, do you sort of,
I believe that I have been reasonably sensible in most of my comments, and even that one wasn't really...
Yeah, it's
misunderstood. But, with that one, I learned one more thing, which is actually an insight of Shakespeare's going back 400 years, when he said that the success of a jest lies not in the tongue of the teller, but in the ear of the hearer. And that is so true, because it doesn't matter, especially in politics, what you intend to say. All that matters is what people believe they heard or can be persuaded to believe that they heard. And that is so important. You really have to think twice before you say anything that could be deliberately misinterpreted or twisted.
And with his following on social media, any little, a little comma here or there could make the different meaning that matter differently, I think. It's
Good morning, sir.
Hi.
You told that Ramdhari Singh Dinkar story, jo. You have both personalities in you. I want to say that you are both a politician and a writer.
Thank you.
When the politician Shashi shatters, does the writer Shashi hold him?
That's a good one.
The sad truth is the answer is no. And the reason the answer is no is that the politician, unfortunately, now dominates the writer. And I'll tell you why. The profession has its own demands. I'm not a nominated member of the Rajya Sabha or something. I'm an elected Lok Sabha MP, accountable to 2 million voters and constituents in my constituency. And their needs and demands will always take precedence. So right now I'm here as in my writer hat. I'm enjoying this conversation. But the moment I leave this room, it'll be messages coming in from my constituency that I have to give attention to, issues dealing with my constituency that get priority. And that has always got to be the case. You have to decide when you have multiple lives or multiple professions where your principal loyalty has to lie. And I think as long as I have this responsibility entrusted to me by the people of Thiruvananthapuram, then that's where my obligation first lies. And so if the politician trips, the politician has to pick himself up. He cannot take refuge in the other line. Yes.
Since you very kindly said there are no silly questions and there are only silly answers, that absolves me. So my question is, you have...
Is it a silly question?
No. You might consider it a silly question, depends on your answer. So you've gone on record talking about that you had egg on your face, whatever the exact quote that's been given. So I really appreciate that you appreciated Mr. Modi's statesmanship and said that he can hug Russia and Ukraine and come out better out of both these interactions. My question is, in your current party, focus is on current. In your current party, do you see any leader who has that statesman-like stature?
No, that's not a fair question to ask. And so I'm going to take refuge in that advice and not answer it. But let me address the broader question. The reason that I took the stand I took in Parliament was partially also reflection of my own years at the United Nations defending these principles and my study of Indian foreign policy, which had consistently stood up for these principles. What are the principles? Respect for the UN Charter, state sovereignty of sovereign member states of the UN, the inviolability of borders, and the inadmissibility of the use of force to settle disputes. These are all principles we have constantly reiterated, including in the famous Panchsheel doctrine and so on. Now, India did not initially stand up for these principles because they didn't want to antagonize Russia. And so I criticized India. But as I pointed out, what we have seen as a result of India's approach is that the Prime Minister is welcome in both countries. And that is something that's very good in a world in which people are not talking to each other. It is important to be able to have countries that can serve as a bridge. Now, it so happens in this particular conflict, Mr. Trump is able to talk to both Mr. Putin and Mr. Zelensky, and that may be a more likely scenario to bring about peace. But should India be required to help, no one can say, well, one side is objecting to India because India has condemned it. India has not condemned either side. India has consistently stood for peace. That is the message that I wanted to give. Let me leave it there.
Shall we go back to some of the youngsters?
I just have a
maybe?
question. I've been waiting for some time. Sashi ji, namaste. My name is Devashi Sarangi. And my question is, when your friends like Panda Jai Panda post on Twitter that you're moving in the same direction, it brings in rumors in terms of, your political career move or whatever is hinted at. How do you counter that? Because he's a close friend, you don't want to hurt him, and as well you want to give, you want to put the rumors to rest. So how do you counter that back in your tweet, or how do you counter that, and how do you use your diplomacy as well as your, writer in you?
Sometimes it doesn't work. I'll tell you why. Because very often, a clarification, a denial, an amplification actually prolongs the story.
That's true.
And Satish is a veteran journalist. He will confirm this. Sometimes the advantage of silence is that you no longer add fuel to the fire. So, yes, I am very frequently misrepresented or misreported, or rumors and controversies are stirred up. Very recently, we had this episode when there was a mistranslation, whether it was accidental or malicious, of a oral Malayalam interview I had given to the Indian Express. They themselves mistranslated. I had said in the interview that many workers feel we have too many leaders and not enough workers in our party in Kerala. And for some reason, they put a headline saying, Tharoor says there are not enough leaders, and there's no leader in the party in Congress. Now, this created a huge controversy. I said, I don't remember saying this. Can you show me proof? And they gave me the so-called translation. I said, this translation of what I said, show me the video of what I said. And they said, for that, you have to wait 3 more days when the podcast will be released. So for 3 days, this controversy raged. Other newspapers put it on the front page. The Congress party was obviously miffed. And on top of that, 3 days, the Kerala television channels discussed nothing else but this. And at the end of the 3rd day, when the podcast came out, the truth of what I said was the opposite. Now, even those 3 days, I had tried to respond and so on. Then my response was, so I just said, I have nothing to say. Wait for the podcast.
Best thing to do.
And that was with hindsight, it didn't change the fact that the story had all those legs, but it was a very revealing thing that you can actually have a controversy based on something as stupid as a mistranslation, as a wrong translation, let alone actually something that you've said or done.
I think we have time
back
only
to the
for
lady.
1 or 2. Yeah, just 1 or, yeah, go ahead, please.
So I would add fuel to that controversy and ask you that you actually quoted, that you have options. The world is already commitment phobic. Then why would you say that you have options? Please explain. Yeah.
I actually said, the full sentence was, I have options. As you know, I write books. I get invited to literary festivals. I'm asked to speak at conferences. So I have options to spend my time. That was the full quote. But of course, the headline only said, I have options. That creates more of a controversy.
Anybody else there at the back? Yeah, go. Just, I think we have time for 1 more question.
Whoever has the mic.
Pass the
should
mic,
speak.
please. Yeah.
Sir, I have read most of your books.
Thank you.
I have also read your Oxford debate. And it was such a wonderful speech you have given in Oxford, which was also appreciated by PM Modi immediately thereafter. I would like to, because it was quite old, 2015, and many must have heard it. Still, I would
I'm
like
sorry,
to.
The sound is breaking up.
Yeah, I
didn't fully-
can't quite.
Still, I would like to, if you can touch upon once again,
the
asking for
speech.
reparation and all that.
I didn't understand the question. Did you get it?
No, about a certain speech, is it?
Sir, I'm talking about your Oxford debate.
Yes.
Oxford debates.
What was the question about it?
If you can touch upon the what you have said there. That
Oh,
would-
that's far too long a subject. But
Yeah.
may I urge you to read my book, An Era of Darkness,
right.
because that speech was about British colonialism's impact on India. And after the success of that speech, I was urged by my publishers to write a book on the theme.
Yeah.
And so I went into it in greater depth in my book, An Era of Darkness. The book is available just outside.
Right.
Please look at it. You'll get all the answers you want on my Oxford speech.
Right. Sir, I will add one more question.
Yeah, we can take
One more.
No, let's,
Should leave here by 12:05. I should get.
okay, then let them be. Why disappoint them? Let's please pass the mic on to some other new, yeah, let's go back to the students there. We'll come to you, sir.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello.
Please go ahead. We can hear
Yeah.
you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Tharoor
Yeah.
wears many hats. One hat, perhaps all of us are aware that whenever you try to read his book or an article, you have to run for a dictionary.
That's not true.
True.
I've written for Outlook. Ask him whether he needed dictionary.
No, with his recent book, perhaps yes. But
That's meant to be
Yeah,
about.
that is what it is meant to be, and then it's explained in the book itself. But the rest of the books, that's not correct. That's
No, in fact, I believe very much in effective communication. And if your communication consists entirely of words that no one understands, how
Yeah.
will you get your
in
message
fact
across?
that is the point he was making. That how there are so many books about our constitution or the leaders is so formidable, and there's such big tomes. You're trying to actually simplify those and get a
Make them
younger
accessible.
audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, get a.
All right. So do we think, do
We
you
have-
want to take, we have
we
time?
I
yeah,
can
You want
take
to
one more
take
question.
One
sure.
more question?
one or two more. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, one or two more. Sure.
So one or two more questions.
please.
Yes,
pass the mic.
madam, there's no mic.
Yeah, just ask. Okay, go ahead. Who's got the mic?
I have a mic.
Please
I-
pass.
Good afternoon, sir.
Sir.
My name is Shilp Sharma. We all grew up by listening to your frequent and seamless jumping of the vocabulary. We all appreciate that.
Thank
But
you.
I would just like to go back to your days of the UN, where if the things would have gone right, probably we would have had the ex-Secretary General sitting right in front of us. But on those days when Kissinger used to call the shots, compared to that UN where you were present, do you think today's UN is still relevant? Comparing all this Philistine, Ukraine, any conflict?
Actually,
you
this is
please
not a new debate. We had the same agony about the relevance of the UN when the Americans invaded Iraq in 2003, and there were protests in many countries saying this was not sanctioned by the UN. The UN has always had examples where the big powers were able to bypass it. But I'll tell you, the relevance of the UN is not only from the Security Council and its ability to maintain peace, which is what you're judging it by.
Yeah.
The UN is also the body that has transformed the world in so many ways, promoted development, ended colonialism, set the global agenda on everything from urban living to sustainability to the environment, the Sustainable Development Goals. There are so many different issues the UN, as a forum to bring countries together to agree on things, has proved its value over and over again. But on peace and security, sometimes, yes, the UN is not adequate because the UN only succeeds where all the member states can agree. Where the powerful countries agree on the UN intervening in a peacekeeping settlement or whatever, the UN can be very effective, and it's won the Nobel Prize several times for that. But when the countries disagree, see, the UN is both a stage and an actor. As a stage, the member states are the actors and they have to agree. Once they agree, then the UN Secretary General, peacekeeping operations agencies can go out and implement it. If they don't agree, how can you blame the actor for not being able to perform on the stage? That's the problem we have. The second Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld, famously said that the United Nations was not created to take mankind to heaven, but rather to save humanity from hell. And that, in sometimes, is the best it can do.
Ma'am, go ahead. The lady.
That would have to be the last
Yeah,
question.
that's
I
the
could really-
last question.
Okay, sir,
Yes.
go ahead quickly.
Can you quickly ask it, please?
Okay.
Okay, that gentleman, then the lady, and then we'll.
Okay, so my name is Rohan Nayak. I'm an advocate, law faculty.
Okay.
So my father is here. He actually introduced me to you way back 15
Thank you.
years ago.
Thank you, sir.
Till then, I've been following you, sir. So first of all, nobody has wished you on Malayali. I'm telling you, Sukhamanu. This is what they tell you. And welcome to the land of Lord Jagannath.
Oh, that's so. Thank you so much.
And so my father is a professor in English.
Okay.
And he has brought 2 of his written books. And if you could just give your autograph at the end of the session, sir. And
We'll
sir,
have a bit of a time crisis because I have
Yes,
a
sir.
1 o'clock flight to Delhi.
Yes,
Yes,
we'll have to
I
take
want-
that up after the session.
Okay, sir.
Ma'am, please go ahead.
And then,
Yes, ma'am, you can
another-
go ahead with the question, please.
Another question, sir. If you could repeat the same, the way you quoted during the launch of your book, The Elephant, the Tiger, and the Cell Phone, and that was re-quoted in the movie Namaste London by Akshay Kumar in his dialogue. Roman Catholic leader of Italian origin, Congress President Sonia Gandhi, making way for a Sikh Manmohan Singh Ji to be sworn in as Prime Minister
By a Muslim president.
President APJ Abdul Kalam. If I can hear that out from you.
That's it. You just said it perfectly.
I want to hear it from you, sir.
You said it better.
I'd like to finish by saying in a country that is 80% Hindu. That was the astonishing thing. And it's true. I'm very proud of that observation
ask
because I
Sam.
heard it from others as well.
Ma'am, go ask.
Mr. Tharoor, I want to know whether politics acts as an impetus or a hindrance in your writing.
Both, man. Absolutely both. Yeah.
Second thing is, would you like to be remembered as a politician or as a writer in the days to come?
Well, look, I mean, first of all, the hindrance part comes from the fact that, as I mentioned earlier to the other question, it will always intrude on the time available. The politics will intrude on the time available for writing and reflection. The other thing is that particularly with kind of fictional writing, you need not only time, which is scarce enough for a politician, but you need a space inside your head to create an alternative universe, to inhabit it, for the characters, episodes, dialogues in that fictional universe to be as real to you as whatever you're encountering in your daily life. And that's not a luxury available to a politician, which is why I haven't written fiction since 2001. But finally, ma'am, to your second part of your question, I will say I'm very conscious that politics eventually is transient. I'm already a former minister. One day I'll be a former MP. But I hope never to be a former
But
writer.
I've seen.
All right.
Thank you very
that-
much. He has a
Oh, but
flight.
I've seen your euphoria in Tiruvananthapuram.
Yeah.
I think
Thank-
that's all we have time for. He has a flight to catch.
Yes, yes. So we'll have to end this session. Apologies to everyone who could not ask a question. But like I said, if only over the weather was the antonym, if it was that would have described the vibe of this gathering here, because everybody is super happy and excited that Dr. Shashi Tharoor is here. Big round of applause. I request Srimati Madhuchanda Balaji to please come on stage and do the honors and felicitate Dr. Shashi Tharoor and Satish ji as well for this wonderful, wonderful discussion. We just didn't realize how time passed. And once this picture is done, if I may also come to the frame. Yes.
Hello. See? Hello. See?
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Shashi Tharoor for you. Let's give a big round of applause. What a wonderful session. I'll also request people not to overcrowd while he's leaving. Allow him some space to walk as well. Even while you're taking your chance at the picture. We have more sessions planned now. So in fact, the next session will be with Princess Gauri Lakshmi Baiji. So I'll request everyone to settle down. And there are also interesting sessions going on in the Crystal Hall. Poetry, storytelling, fiction story sessions. I'll request audience also to visit the Crystal Hall for the sessions if they are interested. In this hall, we'll be taking up the session with Princess Gauri Lakshmi